Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Ultimate Google Display Ads Workshop. Reach millions at minimal cost. I know you guys are super excited to be here, and we are super excited to have all of you on the call today. We have two really incredible speakers set up for you guys as well on this awesome day. So let me first, before we get started, introduce you to who Local IQ is and what Local IQ is. So Local IQ is actually the leading digital marketing expert with deep roots in over 260 communities across the country. It's our passion to really help businesses and communities grow. And if you want to go to the next slide, what's incredible about Local IQ is we have uniquely engaged local audiences, industry-leading technology, deep digital marketing expertise and insights from 300,000 clients across the United States. We're also award-winning proprietary technology and digital platform filled with data-driven campaigns that work for your clients and your agencies, plus premier partnerships to further drive results. We are Local IQ, and we are excited to be partnering together. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our topics today. Our agenda for today is we are going to start with display advertising breakdown. They're going to be going through everything that you need to know for display advertising. Then they're going to be talking about setting up targeting and what your ad copy should look like. And then last but absolutely not least is the Local IQ Targeted Display Network and how we partner and to put that all together for you guys. Our speakers today are going to be the lovely Susie. Some of you guys may recognize her from some of our other talk tracks. And we're going to have a special guest, which we're very excited and lucky to have, which is James Moore, who's the Chief Revenue Officer for Simplify, a company that we work with and partner with on a regular basis. So Susie, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. You guys hold your questions until the end. If you see the question box, what I'd love for you guys to do is to insert your questions there. At the very end of the webinar, we're going to give you guys 15 minutes to do a Q&A. Make sure that you guys have notes in hand, and yes, a recording of this will be sent out after the webinar is finished. Thank you guys so much, and Susie, it's all you.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Thanks for that great intro, James. Honored to be here with you. Honored to be with all of our webinar attendees today. Thanks for hopping on, you guys. So let's dive right into it. Before we get into the nuts and bolts nitty gritty of display, I think it would be good to just start us off with a quick refresher of what display ads are, what the Google Display Network is, what an ad network even is. So let's dive into that first. So essentially an ad network is a web or a group of many sites that your ads will be eligible to serve on. So for the purposes of Google Display Network, it's actually over 2 million sites to be exact that your image ads can show on passively. So that results in up to over 1 trillion possible impressions that your ads can bring in from all the different sites within the Google Display Network. But again, please keep in mind that I'm defining that as one singular network out of many possible networks that your display ads could show on. So in this example here of just the purposes of display, let's say I'm finishing up work, I'm going to cook dinner, maybe I'm also just happen to be in the market to buy a car. So when I look up a recipe to cook dinner, I end up seeing these ads here in this example. So now we know what display ads are. Let's kind of quickly go through why you might want to use these. What's the benefit to you? So obviously, of course, I just had mentioned there's hundreds of thousands of sites that you can show on, hundreds and thousands of impressions just waiting to be scooped up by you out there. So it's really great for brand awareness and for that reach. You can really elevate your brand by keeping yourself top of mind to all these people as you show passively. Along with that, since we have an inflated rate of impressions, we tend to see historically that the cost per click on display is a little bit lower, actually significantly lower, in fact. We'll get into more of that detail later, but just know off the bat, it's a little bit more inexpensive than what you might be used to on, for example, search. Along with that too, and I think glaringly, everybody is familiar with some audience targeting to some extent. Essentially, it's a really great way to continue to interact with your audiences or re-engage them when they're not actively searching. Again, remember, you're showing passively, so this is really great to just keep yourself top of mind to those folks. Also to, for all of those people out there that are sick of writing text ads in their search campaigns, there's only so many ways to say your keyword of, insurance or whatever it may be. You're sick of finessing all those headlines and descriptions. One great thing about display is it's not super text heavy, right? You're not dealing with those text ads. You can really leverage some creative visuals and do some nice images to elevate your brand here. Um, One thing that I did mention was, of course, that audience targeting, but a lot of people forget that there's a lot of other targeting options with display as well that don't necessarily apply to other campaign types. So this is really great if you want to refine and tweak to dial into that right exact person. Also, along with that too, it is a cross-device friendly strategy. So just know that, if you're B2B heavy, you can show your display ads on desktop. If you're the opposite and you're B2C and you're e-commerce, feel free to show on mobile devices. It's really not a one size fits all. You can customize it and show wherever you need to. And at the end of the day, you are showing a lot. It feels a little top of funnel, but just know, even though you might not always see those clicks or those conversions come right in on display, it could be supplementing your other marketing efforts. So for example, if you feel like your search campaign is slow, feel free to jump into display to start elevating your brand awareness and get those searches out there and start boosting that search campaign inherently. So it's a really great supplement for all of your all around efforts there. Now, I started to compare it a little bit to search on that last slide, but let's just kind of talk about the cons, or essentially the key differences from search ads, which I know people tend to be a little bit more familiar with. So again, we have that inflated rate of impressions because we're able to show so frequently so much, but along with that comes with a slightly lower click-through rate and inherently a lower conversion rate. Again, it's a little top of funnel. And we can talk today about some of those targeting options to dial it into boost those conversions, so you're not always seeing a low conversion rate or click-through rate, but just know that that is part of it. It's not as intent heavy as search, so therefore you might have some less conversions coming in or less clicks. I usually tell folks to set their expectations to be under 1% for click-through rate, and that is totally normal and totally okay. We'll kind of get into that a little bit more later, but again, just something to keep in mind. We want to set our expectations low and hope for the best on that display campaign there. Along with that too, like I said, it's not as intent heavy. Of course, with display ads, we're not using keywords like we are in search saying, all right, I only want to show when somebody's typing in that search keyword that I'm bidding on. We don't necessarily have that structure here on display. So you can't necessarily target a user's intent like a search campaign could, but you can still go after them through other refinements like that audience targeting. But if you're not careful with that audience targeting, it can definitely quickly get on focus and quickly start showing and pulling in those clicks, and spend can shoot right up real quick. So one thing to keep in mind is you want to be refining your campaign, and we're going to talk about the ways you can do that today to keep costs in control, because otherwise, if you don't really have targeting set up on your display campaign, but you have that budget and those image ads in there, it's going to run, and it'll run on all 2 million of those sites on the Google Display Network, which you don't always necessarily want. So you know why you want to do it. You want to get into it. So how do you start? How do you set this up? Now, I know some of you are leveraging a marketing partner to do the heavy lifting for you, or some of you are in the weeds of your account. So I'm not, for the sake of time, going to go through every single setup step for a campaign, but I do want to highlight a few display specific steps that I think are helpful to note to either keep in mind when you're creating your display campaign or to incorporate in your conversations with your marketing partner. So the first being ad scheduling, and ad scheduling is actually something you can apply to all different campaign types, but I do think it is important to keep in mind for display. And that's a really great way to reel in that spend and leverage your ability to control when your ads are going to show, because you might not necessarily want to spend for a click that comes in at 3 in the morning. That's probably not a good quality of click if you were showing from 9 to 5 Eastern time or something like that if you were B2B. So even though ad scheduling is something that you can apply across the board on campaigns, keep that in mind, especially for display, because again, you're showing passively, you're showing all the time, and you're kind of showing when people are at their leisure. So you don't really want to spend for maybe late night or early morning clicks, for example, or something like that. And again, since it's easy to have a lesser refined display campaign and have those costs shoot up, it's a great first step to start reeling that in and pulling the reins on that. Again, any of those can be found when you click into that little hidden additional settings during the campaign setup process. Same goes for those device bid adjustments here. I know I kind of talked on the last couple slides about how display is cross-device friendly, and it definitely is, but you can also exclude a device totally if that's what you want to do. Again, if you're more B2B heavy and only want to show your display ads to desktop users, or vice versa, or personally you would rather toss Google more or less money per click for certain devices, you can do that as well if you're on a manual strategy. So that's just another quick little refinement you can do to just get the most bang for your buck on display. Along with device exclusions, you can also do content exclusions. So if you don't want to show on certain types of pages that don't relate to you, maybe sensitive content, things like that, you can also exclude those as well in that hidden additional settings. Now for these final 2 points here, these are a little lesser known, so I did want to highlight the frequency management and targeting expansion. I do see this a little less often in my conversations with clients when setting up display campaigns, but they are just as important as these other points here, and they're a little hidden. So I find that I see frequency management coming up on my conversations with clients without them even realizing. Maybe I'm setting up a remarketing display campaign with a client and they're saying, well, I don't want to be repetitive. I don't want to shove my ad down their throat. I don't want to annoy them. Well, frequency management helps you with that because it's pretty much saying, okay, I only want to show to a user this amount of times per day, per week, per month. So you can control how often your ad is going to show to that same person again and again. So while frequency management isn't always super heavily used and totally fine, it might not be the best fit for you right off the bat. It's just something to keep in mind if that is a concern of yours. Along with that, targeting expansion. Now, this is a little sneaky one that Google kind of fits into that ad group additional settings here at the ad group level. And essentially what it is it functions similarly to a similar audience or a lookalike audience, if anyone is familiar with those. Essentially what it does is Google takes who you're currently targeting in your audience and curates other folks outside of that target audience that have similar behaviors that you can also show to. So of course, the pro to that is it increases your reach, but the con to that is you kind of lack control. We don't necessarily know who is in that quote unquote expansion. So depending on your needs, if you're worried about your audience size being too small, definitely leverage this. If you want to pull in the reins and really only show to who you truly know you're going to show to, definitely feel free to toggle it off. So that's just a quick setup review. Now we know how to set these up. How much is it going to cost you? What's this going to run me? Well, in terms of bids, I had mentioned this earlier, but as we can see from this infographic here, the average cost per click on display is significantly lower than search. Really depending on the industry, it can go higher, but I usually tell folks to set expectations for your average cost per click to be under, $1 or $2 per click here on display, which is really great. It's a huge advantage there. So while we'll get into bid strategy next, just keep in mind if you go the manual route, you're going to be setting a max CPC bid that's much lower than what you might be familiar with over on search. So this is a really great pro to display. People always, I think, automatically default to display being more expensive, but that's not always the case. So kind of started digging into what you might want to be doing from a bidding strategy based off knowing what your cost per click might look like. So I just took this quick little infographic of a list of different bidding strategies that we can choose here. Of course, manual CPC down below, I will highlight first. We know and love it. It's frequently used over on search. And essentially, of course, we're going to be setting individual bids at the ad group level, right? Because we're not using keywords here on display. And you can control that. So it's really good if you're worried about budget and want to keep your costs in control. The other two strategies that I would highlight here are max clicks and max conversions. These three, max conversions, max clicks, and manual, I would say are probably most frequently used on display. Really good for starter campaigns. And the reason being, they don't require any minimum historical data in order to optimize well. So of course, those automated strategies, Google is picking our bid for us, and usually it needs something to go off of, right? But for max clicks and max conversions, it doesn't necessarily need that to optimize well. So it's really good for a brand new campaign if you're just starting out on display, versus something like target CPA and target, which is target cost per acquisition, target cost per conversion there, or target return on ad spend, and viewable cost per 1,000 impressions. You kind of need to have a lot of data already backing you in order for it to work well. I think I see a lot of folks automatically always wanting to go target CPA right off the bat, right? Because in an ideal world, we all want to get a CPA of $1, right? We all want to pull in a conversion for $1 and we want to target for that. But that's not always realistic based off your account needs and goals. If you don't have the historical data for it to optimize well, or if you're starting off with a new campaign or you set a target too low, it can definitely hurt you. It'll be struggling to optimize and it won't really bid that well. So, it really depends on where you are in your display journey, but there's a lot of different options just based off your needs. So just wanted to quickly highlight that. Now, I know I looked at some of the different options at a high level, but I do just want to reiterate, you're really looking at two different core cohorts here. We have the manual over on the left and the automatic, right? So manual, again, we're familiar with it. It gives us more control. We're selecting those bids individually. It is a little time consuming though. You have to keep up with it. So this is good if you're in the weeds of your account every day and managing those bid adjustments that it takes into account. But if you aren't necessarily in the account every day, or you're not going to keep up with it, it's not quite as helpful as you might think, because you need to keep your bids on a level playing field with your average cost per click. Of course, again, with that control, if you're pressed for budget, it is a great option. So definitely something that I do commonly see being used on display, but just kind of wanted to break that down in comparison to automatic, which of course, over on the right, we have a lot more options, based off your needs. So it's good if you have really specific or unique business goals there. And of course, that'll save us some time, right? Because Google's going to be picking the bids for us. We love to leverage that machine learning. But just know you're not really in as much control as you are with manual. So you might see spend or your cost per click go up a little bit. You do have to sit and wait out that algorithmic learning period, which essentially means for the first week or two, Google's going to be trying different bids to see what works best for your campaign. So if your data is funky the first week or two, don't be alarmed, totally normal. Essentially, it just means that it's going through that learning period there. Now, I highlighted max clicks on this as well, because I would say that's probably the closest marriage between manual and automatic. Essentially, what that is it allows you to set a max CPC bid cap where you'll limit how much Google will bid for you. So while the other automatic strategies, you still don't really control how much Google bids for you, max clicks allows you to do that. So again, that's another pro of going that automatic route, maybe with that max clicks route. At the end of the day, these are both set at the campaign level, and they can vary campaign to campaign. So don't be afraid to try one on one campaign, one on another, switch them up after a while, try out different strategies to see what works best for you. But just keep in mind, if you think you're using manual as a loophole to stay in control of costs, either way, any of these strategies here can still go above your daily budget. And that's just because, again, Google's going to take that daily budget and average it out to an overall monthly spend, which I'll kind of explain next on the next slide. So before we get into the best practices that I listed over here on the left, going back to my last point of the budgets ebbing and flowing day over day, it's because Google takes that daily budget and averages it out to an overall monthly projected spend. So if you're unsure how much your display campaign is going to cost you and you want to figure that out, I would first start with maybe a daily budget, multiply that by Google's recommended number of 30.4, which is the average number of days in the month, and then you'll come out to a monthly spend. So for example, if my daily budget is $10, then Google might spend $8 one day and $12 the next day, but over the 30-day period, it'll average out to, I don't know, $300 per month. I'm so bad with mental math, but you guys get the idea. So keep that in mind if you're kind of unsure where to start in terms of budget, in terms of spend. Something else to keep in mind when you're setting up expectations for spend and budget is I did mention like when you're setting up your bid is you're going to want to keep it low because we know our average CPC is low, but you're not going to want to set it too low. And I know you guys are like, all right, Susie, you're saying low, but not too low. Now, what does that mean? Well, what it means is, like I said, I tend to see over hundreds of accounts, the average CPC being $1, $2. So I usually recommend to folks, if you have no idea what your average CPC is going to be, then go ahead and shoot for $1 or $1.50 to start, pretty healthy there, and then go lower or higher from there. But you don't want to set it too low and then be staring at your screen saying, why isn't my display campaign working? Why am I not pulling in more impressions? And it's because you're not bidding high enough. So it's not allowing you to show you're not ranking. That going along with that too, with your clicks, it could be that you need to pull in more clicks to get more conversions because we see slightly lower conversion rates on display. So what I always tell folks is keep a budget high enough to aim for the amount of clicks that you ideally want for in a day, and ideally what you would expect to pull in a conversion. Now I know we want every single click to convert, but we all know that that's not going to happen. So if I ideally want 10 clicks in a day and my average CPC is $1, then my daily budget better be $10 or else I'm not going to get those 10 clicks. So just keeping that in mind as well to kind of push for more clicks so that you can get a higher chance of getting those conversions there. But at the end of the day, again, you want to take a step back and just think realistically about, where your account is, where your historical data is, and what you're looking to get out of your display campaign, and you'll be able to better find the right strategy for you. So with that, let's talk about how to keep those costs low. And that's all going to come down to targeting. So I'll kind of go through our different targeting options for display and how you can optimize these to keep your costs low here. So of course, the elephant in the room is audience targeting. We all know that this is super frequently used across many different campaign types, but definitely the most frequently used tactic when it comes to display. And this is just a quick little screenshot of what it looks like when you set them up on display. But I'll go through the different options here, but I will say they're really popular to use on display campaigns. And I recommend using them. It's helpful if you're not sure where to go. We'll kind of go through your different options, but you can definitely explore. You can definitely layer them. So really feel free to have fun and get creative with those audiences there. So I'll kind of go through these templated, curated ones that Google gives us first, and then we'll go into the ones that we create ourselves because we don't have to have Google do all the heavy lifting for us. So I would say all of these are used pretty evenly and all are equally as successful. One doesn't take priority over the other. It really depends on your needs. But essentially, kind of the differences here, I would consider InMarket and Affinity audiences as sister audiences in a way. Essentially, they work very similarly where, on the left-hand side, we have that in-market audience that Google will curate for us based off categories. So essentially, I choose a category of an in-market audience, and what that'll do is it'll show to people who are actively searching or actively in the market for whatever category I select. So it's whom Google believes is going to purchase that product or service. So people come and go out of that audience because it's so short term in a way. So definitely helpful if you're looking for a little bit of a higher intent audience versus the affinity audience is kind of the same idea, but it's a little bit more longer term. So it's people who have the long-standing interests, habits for that category that you select, the lifestyle, they have months or years of search history for whatever subject that you select there. They both work equally as well, and they both go great hand in hand together too. And on the right-hand side, a little bit different, we have those detailed demographics. And I will admit, this is slightly less popular, I would say, than the in-market and affinity, but definitely still used often. We know already we can refine by demographics at the campaign setup level or in the demographics section of Google. But this is going a little bit beyond just the age, gender, income selections that we have there that we already know of. These are a little bit more complex. So what it is showing the people who are, have these in-depth demographics about them based off their search history. So their parents, they recently graduated college, recently bought a house. Those types of milestones and life events is essentially what you'll find in the detailed demographics section. So similar to InMarket, it's a little bit more timely and people will come and go in and out of it. Now, again, we don't need to be too lazy with Google giving us these templated audiences as well. So you can make some audiences too. And well, similar audiences being a slight discrepancy there, but I'll get there. But I know we want to cover remarketing. Everyone's dying to talk about remarketing all the time. It's very popular. And understandably so, right? We want to go after people who have visited our site who are a little bit further down the funnel, maybe a little bit closer to converting. So that's what remarketing is over here on the left, where we're showing to people who have visited our website or visited a certain page on our site. This is really great. A lot of people like to use it. They think it helps push conversions. It's definitely true that does. But just keep in mind, it doesn't always have to be used or have to apply to you, because there is that minimum of 100 unique users that you need in that audience in order for you to show. And even then, that's going to be pretty small, slow results here if we're thinking back to how many eligible impressions are out there in the display networks. So while we have more control because we know we're going after those specific people that have visited our website, it can be a little restrictive, right? So you really kind of want to think back, all right, do I have enough web traffic to leverage remarketing right now? And if I'm not, then maybe I want to leverage display to build my remarketing audience or push other initiatives to build my remarketing audience so I can get there eventually. It's definitely helpful, but just want to keep in mind, like, while it is a really good tool to use, it's not the only one out there. And, you know, you're being more and more restrictive with it because you're going to say, all right, not only do I only want to show to people who have visited my site, but thinking back to those extra settings that I had just talked about in the setup section, I only want to show to people who have visited my site when they're in a certain location, when it's this time of day, when they're on this type of device. And you can see it just layers on and can get real restrictive real quick. So an alternative to that is the similar audiences here in the middle. And those function similar to like a Facebook lookalike audience, where Google will take that remarketing audience that it gives us and find other people that have similar behaviors to those folks in our remarketing audience and show to them. So it is a great alternative if your remarketing audience is a little small or you just want to broaden your reach there. It is Google curated, so of course there is that slight lack of control there. We don't necessarily know who's in that audience, but it's another great alternative if you just want a little bit more reach other than remarketing. And then custom audiences over here on the right. These I feel like don't get used too frequently by clients until I bring it up, but I really think they're a great tool and awesome to use. If you want to take it a step further and really customize it, leverage these custom intent audiences. Essentially what they're saying is, oh, I only want to show my display ad to people who have visited a certain page, have searched certain words, maybe have certain interests, or even visited specific types of places in real life. So a great example of leveraging a custom audience is, let's say, obviously you can't remarket to your competitors' website visitors, right? That's impossible. But you can get the closest thing that you can do is say, all right, I want to show to people who have visited pages similar to my competitor's URL, because I know off the bat that's at least getting a little bit closer to who my competitors might be pulling in. So that's pretty much audience targeting, but people tend to forget that audience targeting isn't your only option when it comes to display. So there's also content targeting, which I will admit is slightly less frequently used than audience targeting, but can be just as effective, if not more, when it fits your needs here. So there's 3 different forms of content targeting. You can target by placement, you can target by keyword, and target by topic. Essentially, all these do is, instead of saying who you want to show to with those audiences, you're saying where you want to show to, or what types of sites or what types of content your display ad is going to share the web page with. So, for example, with placements, you're going to select a certain website that's in Google's display network that you will show your ad on. So let's say you could pick YouTube or a certain magazine or a certain blog, so as long as they're in the Google Display Network. And that's what to keep in mind, is you might be kind of limited because Google doesn't own every single website out there. Again, with any of these forms of content targeting, it can be a little restrictive. So now think about, okay, if I'm layering on an ad schedule, device bid adjustments, location, and a remarketing audience, saying, I only want to show to people who visited my website on top of this, and I only want to show to them when they're on this specific other website, it's getting real restrictive real quick, and your results are going to be kind of slow. That goes similarly for keywords as well. I would say this is probably the least frequent form of display targeting that I see. And it works differently, of course, than your search keywords that you know. So instead of saying, I only want to show when people type in the certain keyword, you're saying, I only want to show on pages that contain this keyword. So again, content targeting, saying where you want to be, where you want to show. So for example, if I am a restaurant and I'm coming out with a new drink menu, maybe I want to show on pages that contain the word cocktails or something like that. So I would put cocktails as my keyword, and then my ads only show on pages that contain that keyword. Again, it can be a little restrictive. Like I said, probably the least frequent one I see, but definitely can work in some situations. And then topic targeting, kind of self-explanatory here as we see with this screenshot. Google gives us templated topics, and then we go ahead and select the category that we would like to show for pages that fall into that category for. So again, in that same example, if I am that restaurant, I might select pages that have to do with food and drink. So that way I only show my display ad on pages that relate to the food and drink topic. So let's kind of see what that might actually mean in action, because I feel like, again, content targeting isn't as widely known as audience targeting. So in this example here, let's pretend that I'm Coca-Cola, right? Would be great. I'd be a millionaire. And essentially we're seeing here, maybe I'm marketing my soft drinks, and I think about who my target audience member is. Take a step back and think of that ideal person. They're out, they're exercising, they're going for a run, maybe they're stopping in at a gas station, getting a drink. So I want to show to people who are into running. So what I might do is some content targeting in a couple different ways. So there's a few different ways that this Coca-Cola ad could have gotten on here. The first one, and I don't know if Runner's World is in the Google Display Network. There's really no way to know every single site that's on there. But essentially, I could have put in Runner's World because I know that I want to show my ad there, so I chose that as a placement. And that's the one and only place that my ad will show, is Runner's World. So that's the form of placement targeting that could have put that ad there. Now there's also, of course, the keyword targeting. So again, I know that I want to go after runners. So I might use the keyword run or running as my content keyword targeting. And therefore, I only am showing on pages that relate or have that keyword on that page. Of course, Runner's World has that term right on here, so my ad is showing. Then the last and final option, of course, is maybe this is in that category of fitness and wellness or health and fitness, any of those types of categories with the topic targeting. So I selected that. Since Runner's World falls into that content topic targeting category, my ad is now showing here. So we know where we're going to show. Let's talk about how that's going to look. What types of ads do we have at our options? How do we format them? What does that look like? So responsive display ads are similar to those responsive search ads, where we're cycling through multiple different headlines and descriptions and multiple different images and videos here for display. The great thing about this is, as we can see, it's going to dynamically rotate and change to fit whatever placement it falls into, because again, we're showing on like the side of the screen, the top, so it's going to be different sizes, different placements, which is great. We can kind of create this, set it and forget it. But you're going to want to use a universal image, kind of like in this example here. I usually tell folks to shy away from the like stock photos or pictures of people, because while it's going to dynamically change for me, I can't really control what that's going to look like. And I have seen some situations where it's cropped weird, and next thing you know, you have an ad where it's just somebody's elbow or knee or something like that. So there is, of course, this slight lack of control here with the responsive display ads. But again, they're helpful because you set it and forget it. They switch through. You don't have to worry about your image sizes. You get some variety in there because it's going to swap out with those headlines and descriptions. So you're keeping things fresh for your viewers. Overall, just a really great tool to leverage. I wouldn't say necessarily it works more or less better than single image ads. That's our second ad type here, and that's really, they both work equally as well. I'd say they're both used just as frequently. I'd say it's 50-50. Some of my accounts use responsive, some of them use single image. So while I kind of talked about the benefits and drawbacks to that responsive ad, we kind of have those here with the single image ads as well. So that's that other option where you just go ahead and right away, just click upload display ads, you plug in the ads, you plug in the final URL, and you're good to go. With this, you need to have that image ready to go. It already looks like an ad. It has text overlaying it. And you need to have them in the right size for all the different placements ready to go. If you're unsure of that, feel free to leverage the supported sizes and formats there. Over on the bottom left, it is helpful just to remind yourself you might have to finesse and compress an image. Totally fine, totally normal. Essentially here, it's obviously quicker to create in Google Ads because you just upload them and you're good to go. But the drawback is it takes a little bit of time to create offline because you need to have the images already edited and ready to go. So kind of like responsive takes a little more time to create in Google Ads, but less time to create offline because you can just pull up an image right away. Last thing I'll kind of say here is, again, just to keep in mind, you might have to compress or finesse your image a little bit. I do like to remind folks it's pretty small. You need to keep it under 150 KB. So you might just go ahead and compress your images if need be. And then I did highlight here some of the most frequent placement sizes that I do see most heavily used. It doesn't mean the other ones in here aren't used or don't work. They all do well. They all are used pretty frequently. But I do have a lot of folks coming to me saying like, this is a huge list and I don't have the capacity to do that many different images in different sizes. Totally fine. This is what I would, say to recommend to start you off if you're unsure, because these are pretty common. But again, these all work well. And just kind of a quick reminder there that there is set sizes that you need to abide to. So that was really Google Display Network in a nutshell. Now I know that's a ton of information, but just keep in mind that's not the only thing out here. So I'll hand it off to James to kind of tell us what it means to have those ad networks outside of the Google Display Network and what that kind of looks like.
All right, James Moore here. Hope you can hear me okay, everyone. Happy to be here talking to you about what's beyond GDM. So let me just say this. Obviously, you've just learned a lot or got a refresher about Google Display Network. From my perspective, as somebody who's been in this industry for a long time, we refer to the Google Display Network by definition as a walled garden. The Google Display Network, while powerful and effective, it allows advertisers to reach consumers across more than 2 million websites, videos, apps that are owned by Google or licensed to be sold through the Google Display Publisher Network. And so obviously there's a lot of power there and there's some fairly significant reach. And while the reach of GDN is significant, there are some limitations that are common to the Google Display Network. In fact, they're the same limitations that are common to buying advertising through any singular network. And really the two things that does to advertisers is it gives you limited reach. So at the end of the day, consumers today are consuming content of all types across millions of websites, across millions of apps. And it's hard to predict where they're going to go and to learn information, to browse, to interact with the internet in exchange for advertising. And ultimately, when you're buying advertising through GDN, you are limited to reaching them on the sites that they can fundamentally reach. And if that consumer that you are attempting to reach is fundamentally on a different site or a different app, viewing a different piece of content, then you may not be able to reach that consumer with the ad at the right time. Secondary to that, most networks, including GDN, in addition to only serving ads across the publishers that are in that network, can fundamentally usually only use data associated with behavior that's taking place on those networks. And so if somebody is reading about a particular product or service or searching on a particular product or service and doing so within the Google network, then they're going to have great data and intelligence about what that consumer is doing and can use that data intelligence to serve them when they're on a Google Display Network site. However, if somebody is engaged in a behavior while on a Google Display Network, can they use that data to target them on a publisher page that is not part of that network? Or stated differently, if somebody engaged in a behavior that expressed intent or interest in your product or services on a site that was not part of the Google Display Network, where that behavior could not be captured and seen, how could they target that consumer when they are on that network with that information? And so networks are fantastic, and Google clearly is one of the biggest, if not the biggest in the world, but they do have their limitations both in the data that they see on consumers and the inventory they can reach. So I just want to back up for a second in the few minutes I have with you to just kind of make a broad statement, and that is the internet is a big place and it's getting bigger. The consumer that you're trying to reach with a display ad is consuming a diverse source of content on devices of personal preference across a vast internet that frankly transcends the Google-owned properties. And I pulled some recent stats from Live Internet Stats to give you a bit of a snapshot as to the world that exists out there. So there's over 4.9 billion people accessing content in exchange for advertising. There's a little over 1.8 billion websites, and domestically in the US, there's 644 million active websites that are ad supported, where a consumer may be browsing, viewing content, or interacting with in some way where you could reach them with an advertisement. And really, beyond that, if you think about this, the world with 4G and now with 5G, almost every consumer is carrying a smartphone. Better than 75% of the time that people spend on the internet, they're actually interacting with content in a mobile environment. And when they do that, they're spending a huge portion of the time inside of apps. And there's more than 3 million unique apps. And by the time I wrote that stat, it was already out of date. There's well over 1 million in the iTunes store, app store to download, and the iOS app store, and then in the Google Play Store for Android phones, well over 2 million. And 98% of those ads are free and ad supported, and that's where people spend a ton of their time. Here's another little stat for you to consider. There's over 2.2 million smartphones that are sold per day in this country. There's more smartphones sold per day than the rate of birth in this country, which means we're selling phones faster than we're populating this earth. That may slow down someday, but it seems everybody's got a smartphone and everybody's interacting with content, and it's becoming more and more mobile. And now, to take it even one step further, is every television set in America is now embedded with smart TV capabilities, and/or consumers may be plugging in one or more devices to begin streaming ad-supported content on the television set, opening up that device to be yet another screen where you're able to reach somebody with both a video or a display ad. So the internet's a massive place. So to put that in just a little bit of perspective, if Google Display Network gets your ads in front of 2 million websites and apps, well, then they're roughly seeing 1% of the total apps and websites that are available. So while they may see some of the consumers who are in your marketplace engaged in certain behavior, if you would like a more complete picture of the internet, then you're going to want to participate in targeted display, which taps not only into Google, but into hundreds of networks that's going to allow you to look at the complete picture of the consumer and to reach them on a more broad collection of websites and apps. And so I also just wanted to give you some perspective that obviously you just heard in the presentation some of the targeting methodology that is utilized in the Google Display Network. A lot of that same methodology and more is utilized outside of the Google Display Network to identify in-market consumers who are expressing interest or intent for your products and services. I've listed just a little bit of the data that is utilized and collected. So as consumers move across your community, for instance, if you wanted to leverage location data, the mobile GPS data that streams off the mobile phones and devices, and for instance, you said, I would love to serve an ad to somebody I know has physically set foot inside of my competitor's location, or we have a student offer and I would love to serve ads to people who fundamentally, who are students and set foot on a college campus or live in a college dormitory. I want to target people who are searching on keywords, but maybe I want to target people beyond just the keywords they search on the Google search engine, but perhaps as people browse across the web, virtually every publisher site has a search engine, and people are entering keywords and expressing intent in these search engines across publisher sites. And if you want the ability to tap into that population and to be able to market to consumers with advertisement that is timed properly based on their consumption behavior, their search behavior, their location behavior, and to be able to do that even outside the display network, then targeted display is going to be a great solution for you. And there's, of course, an entire wave of information that we have available on consumers that is offline data that is common. Another way to think of it is data commonly associated with data that would be known by your credit bureaus: income, demographics. Do you own a home? Do you lease a home? Do you own a car? Do you lease a car? Do you have kids? Veterans, students, all that kind of thing. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of data variables available to curate, identify the ideal consumer to reach them across a broad range of apps and websites. And so the final message I would leave with you about functioning this targeted display advertising outside of a Google display network is that you cannot predict where people are going to go when they go into the internet. The internet is a living, breathing organism with new websites created every day, new apps created every day. Some consumers are going to research one way, some consumers are going to research another. And you need a solution that's going to allow you to have an audience-first approach to advertising. In the traditional sense, you would buy advertising and you would hope that the ideal consumer is consuming the content that you were buying. Well, in today's world, we can really identify the consumer as they're navigating across apps and across websites, and we can deliver ads to that targeted consumer kind of irregardless of whatever website or apps they happen to go to. And so that audience-first approach allows you to get the most ROI out of your advertising dollar, and the targeted display network alongside GDN is going to give you a more complete picture of your consumer and the ability to reach them throughout the entirety of the internet.
Great. Thanks so much for that, James. That was awesome. Yeah, so again, there's a whole other world way beyond Google Display Network that we have access to here at Local IQ with our own targeted display network. So it's really great to see the other options that are out there with a targeted display network, as James explained. So with that, just to kind of recap, keep in mind that I think the main points to take away, while we were pretty nitty gritty into the weeds here of display, at a high level, display can fit any type of business needs. So regardless of your unique needs and whether you're pressed for budget or not pressed for budget, or have a really niche product or have a really generalized product, you can find a way to have display fit into your marketing strategy. And it's a great way to elevate your brand and to supplement and have a very holistic marketing strategy there. Along with that too, we obviously saw there's endless targeting options within the Google Display Network, even more targeting options outside of the Google Display Network. So you can really pick and choose whether you want to continue with that top of funnel strategy, reaching newer folks, or go more bottom of funnel strategy and be a little bit on the safer side and get closer to those folks who are going to convert. Either works well, and you can really customize and see what works for you, or do both. And as James had mentioned, targeted display networks can work alongside Google Display Networks as a great way to get even more results and even better results. Or if there is specific targeting options that you want there that you can't necessarily find on Google Display, it's a great way to use both of those hand in hand. So with that, I'll hand it off to Jen for the Q&A, but super great points there by James. Thank you.
I was still muted. Sorry about that. Thank you guys. That was amazing. I learned actually a ton. And so I'm going to open it up for Q&A. We have a ton of questions here. I'm going to start at the very top with Andrea, who asked, how are target ads working with the changes with Apple products?
So I'd be happy to take that. So, consumer privacy has gone a bit mainstream over the last couple of years. It began in Europe with GDPR, and then in California, they passed legislation, CCPA. And of course, now we've seen the device manufacturers such as Apple step in with iOS 14. And so I think what we're finding is that consumer privacy is an important topic. And the good thing about targeted display, by the way, is that despite what people may or may not think, the data has actually always been non-personally identifiable. We've never ever used data. This industry in general has never used data that is considered personally identifiable. We're always using behavioral data, so we don't know who you are, but we know the device and we know behaviors such as sites you've visited or keywords you've searched on, or location data. What we're seeing with the changes in iOS is that they're bringing consumer knowledge into the forefront, that this data is being utilized, and they're giving consumers the option by declaring openly that this is the data that this app is attempting to collect, and do you want to participate in this, and this is how that data is going to be utilized. Okay. Now, what's going to happen is the apps are going to have to build functionality into them to justify the exchange of that information. So if an app wants your location data, as an example, to be able to ping the GPS receiver that's in your phone, they need to build functionality that makes it in your interest to do so, such that the app performs better, faster, and provides greater services that you can't live without in exchange for that information. And so, so far as they've rolled out these changes, we've seen relatively low impact. And as it turns out, the identifiers that come off of iOS devices are only one identifier. And so our company, like most companies, is looking at a bit of a metagraph of many different privacy compliant identifiers to identify consumers, most of which at this point are opt-in and publicly declared. And so we've not seen any real impact in terms of our ability to identify consumer behavior, to reach them with a targeted ad, and to measure performance. But we're going to continue to monitor it. We don't have a crystal ball, but so far it just seems like a step in the right direction toward maintaining the value of targeted display advertising, but giving consumers greater control over their ability to participate in it.
Thank you. That was extremely thorough and very well said. Our next question is from Ken, who asks, are Google Display Ads an effective tool for brand building and customer attraction for a small business serving local patrons?
I can take that one. Yeah, they absolutely are. So I know I kind of talked about Google Display at a super high level and how you can reach so much, but it really is a great fit regardless of your business type. So in that example of being a smaller business, you have a really specific reach, you have a specific audience that you want to get to, and you have a very specific location. Keep in mind that you can limit your display advertising by location targeting, or something we call geofencing as well. So you're able to set up certain specific locations on your display campaign so that you only show to folks within that location. And then you can layer on the other targeting options we said to keep costs low. So you're saying, not only do I want to show to folks close to my local business, but I also only want to show to folks who are close to my local business and interested in my local business, whether that be via content or audience targeting, and you end up with a pretty cost-effective display campaign, which I know with small businesses, of course, cost is always top of mind. So I hope that helped answer the question.
Awesome. Yes, that was great. We have a question. How do you find out if a website is on the Google network?
So in my experience, again, there's no real way. I don't even believe, and James, feel free to correct me here, but I don't believe Google actually even releases a full list. It's trial and error when you're putting in those placement targets. That's really the only time you would need to use it to know exactly what's in there. You're gonna see as you start to run your Google display campaigns where your ads are showing, so you'll get an idea of what types of websites are on there. Again, as I had mentioned, it's over 2 million sites. Most of the big players are on there. James had mentioned it is definitely a big player in terms of display networks. So, usually odds are it's on there, but there's no way to know for sure. You can search it though when you're selecting placements.
Awesome. This one is, how does programmatic fit into GDN and targeted display?
So I'll take that one. This is James. So programmatic by definition is a big scary word that simply means automated. And at Local IQ, the technology that you use there is leveraging automated programmatic media buying technology to essentially buy ads programmatically across the entirety of the internet, of which Google is a part of that. So Google has a display network, and that's obviously what's here. That gives you the ability to leverage Google data to serve on Google properties. Now, Google also monetizes that inventory through an exchange called Google AdX, and therefore Google is one of hundreds of networks that can be bought programmatically. And the whole concept behind programmatic media buying is this idea that you have limited budget and a very specific goal in a local community. You cannot predict every website or every app that the consumer is going to go to. Therefore, if you can drill down and identify the correct behavior or demographic or other audience characteristic that is your ideal customer, programmatic media buying is going to basically take the dollars that you provide for the campaign, because we could spend so much more than you probably have provided, and basically determine on a one impression by impression basis which ads are worth buying, that are going to get you the best value to a consumer who's most likely to take the result that you're judging as a success on the campaign. And so it's building automation to basically give you the ability to buy across hundreds of networks, one impression at a time based on audience data, and Google's a part of that.
Awesome. And this may be our last question. We only have 3 minutes left. So will behavioral targeting be accurate if there aren't third-party cookies to track them?
So I'm happy to take that question too. Again, nobody has a crystal ball into what's going to happen in the future, but behavioral targeting by definition can be any number of things. The fact that you visited certain websites of certain type, that says a behavior. The fact that you've searched on particular keywords, that says a certain behavior. And so, as the data marketplace and privacy legislation evolves, new data types become available that stream off of the devices, and certain data types disappear. It's this ever-evolving landscape. And as it turns out, there are many, many different signals that come in by which we identify behavior, roll that up to particular consumers. And even Google, by the way, announced recently that they're using something called a flock mentality, which basically stands for federated learning of cohorts, which means they were not going to use a personal identifier. But for instance, if you wanted to reach somebody who has searched on a particular subject, they're going to take that consumer and put them in a very small segment with a handful of other people who perform the same search. So you may be targeting that same consumer, or you may be targeting a consumer who basically engaged in the exact same behavior. And we've actually done analysis to see what performance looks like serving against these micro segments or flocks compared to the individual identifiers. And we've seen relatively no drop off in performance, which means the lookalike technology and the grouping of these individuals into small groupings as opposed to individual identifiers is performing just as well as the individual identifiers. So it's evolving, but so far it looks good.
All right, guys, that's all the questions we have time for today. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone. If you do have questions, feel free to shoot us an email or respond to the email that you guys receive after the webinar. We'll be sending out a recording after the webinar ends, so you guys should receive that no later than tomorrow. Thank you guys so much to Susie and James. You guys were amazing. Big kudos to you both. This is a difficult subject, so I really appreciate you guys coming on today and helping us to explain everything. Thank you guys so much again, and we will see you guys next time.
Great. Thanks, guys.